We'll have to run this locally for now. I'll have to speak to IT about why our apps aren't running it. Because when I run it and connect it through the phone, it works fine. When I tether it, it works fine. If I take my laptop home and connect to MongoLab, it should connect. So for now, I'm just going to do it locally. So just make sure you've got a MongoDB process running. You have a local data directory. And you've run that insert script from Blackboard from week 5. So I should get a blank articles page. So now what we want to do, when we're rendering our articles index, we also want to loop through and generate a list of articles. So I'm going to open up go into Views, Articles, Index.ejs. And we'll want to do some coding in our views. So inside my main section, we've got an H1. We'll create a set of server-side tags, and we'll create a for loop. So from 0 to articles.length. And I'll open my curly brace, and then I'll close my tag here. And then down below, we'll just close that curly brace. So this will let us iterate through our articles variable. So this value here is referencing this variable name right here. Just like with our title, we created a title variable in our root file, and in our header, we're outputting or referencing that variable. We're doing the same here. So we're creating an articles variable, and now we're referencing that in our EJS view. So all we want to do here for starters is let's create a list item, and we can just display for each item in the array, we want to display the title column. So article 0.title will show us the first title. Thank you. I missed that closing curly bracket.
So, I can't remember if I asked this already, but is there a PHP echo equivalent in Node?
The equal sign is the echo.
Just equal within.
Yep.
So like if we were.
That is the equivalent of echo.
But if we wanted the li, if we didn't want to close off after the for loop, so can we just put that all in one node container? Do you know what I mean? Like. Like to put so that the li doesn't have to be in HTML format, but it could be.
I see. We'd actually.
Into HTML, you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm so
We'll have to try. We'll try it. Like I see what you mean, where we're generating the li tag within our.
Yeah, just so we don't have to keep open closing.
We'll try it and see. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So if I refresh, we now get the article titles showing up here. So this name, again, it's important that this name matches exactly what we call the variable name in our controller. If I call it, articles data, for example, you notice my editor says it goes from purple to black, and it says I don't know what this is. If I refresh my page, I'm probably going to get an error. Articles data not defined. So it knows what articles is because I've defined that variable in my controller and passed it to the view. If those names don't align, we're going to get a not defined error. As soon as I put it back to articles, my editor puts it in purple, it recognizes that variable in my controller. Couple things we didn't do. We put LI tags on here. It looks fine, but we actually forgot the UL. All of this should be nested inside an unordered list. And I'm going to use a bit of Bootstrap for styling. We'll give this a class of list group. And my LIs will have a class of list group item. Dan, this is part of the reason I kind of do it this way, because then we're starting to write out a lot of stuff, including the HTML, you know, the brackets and the quotes. So this should add a bit of formatting. Then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make these headings links, so the user can click them and see the full article. We're also going to want to add the date. So if I refresh, our little bullets go away now. Our list is formatted pretty nicely with Bootstrap. I've got duplicates in mine, which is okay, because hopefully we'll get to delete today and I can get rid of those duplicate articles I inserted. So what I'm going to do is I want to make the title inside of each list. I also want to use an anchor tag. So for starters, I'll keep it simple first. I'll create an anchor. So I'm just putting in some static HTML here. And then I'll close my So this should make each article heading a link now. Just wrapping. We're going to change this URL in a minute, because right now they're all just going to link back to the same page. That's step one. So they're all links now. However, they all just take me back to the same page. We don't want to link here. We want to link off. The URL that we want will look like this. So it'll be /articles and then a slash where we use that object ID that MongoDB generates as the parameter. Okay? So the effect will be something like this. As an example, so here's my all right, their link's broken. So what we want to do now, after articles, we want a slash. How can we append on the object ID so that when we click that link, yep, our server-side tags. Yeah, we need one other thing. We need the equals. So articles I, and the column is called _ID. That's the default primary key column that MongoDB generates. So we'll open those server tags. We'll include the equals. And then we want to append on the ID column. So then we're going to need a root handler in our controller that checks for requests at /articles, but where there's also an optional ID parameter on the end. If we get that, we don't want to load the home page. We want to load a different view instead. So now if I refresh, that's okay, we got not found because we haven't handled this root yet. So there's our ID. And it's nice because the IDs are generated in this way, they're pretty obscure to the user. I mean, if you want to do encryption and decryption on them as well, you can, but they're not plain text, right? They're not 1, 2, 3, and the next one's 1, 2, 4. So we'll set up this root handler for editing a bit later. We'll leave this for now. The other thing we want to add underneath the title is we want to display the article date. We won't display the full article content on here. That's what the user will click the link to see the full article. But we might want to include the date. So after our A tag, I'm just going to enter a line break and another server-side tag, where again we'll output articles I, and the field is called created. And again, my editor prompts, it recognizes when I type .c, it knows this is a property because this is defined in our article schema. So we'll output that value as well. So the title will be a link, then we'll get a carriage return, and we'll have the date printed underneath. The date doesn't need to be a link, just the title. Well, that doesn't look great. Exactly.
I think you're
So
taking li.
Yes,
Yeah.
my end li is now in the wrong place. I want this to go down at the bottom. All of this is within the li tag, but we're also going to want to change the date formatting. So as you can imagine, Node has some formats we can look up. We want to check what can we do. We could use an npm package, or we can just call to a date string, which will be simple. So here, we'll just append on the toDate string method built into Node. Takes a date object, parses it, and we'll get a friendlier formatted date. Without that, we get the full date, which is just too long, looks crappy. That looks pretty good. So there are other formatting options. I think this format will work just fine for our purposes. So this page is almost done. The only other thing we're going to do in here is above our list, let's also add a link so that the user can go ahead and add a new article. So what URL do you think, what URL should we use for loading that view the user wants to add? What URL should we run that under? So far we've defined two. /articles is our index view. /articles / an ID number will be our editing view. So what URL should we use if the user says, hey, I want to add a new article? What would maybe make sense? Yeah, why don't we define that? We'll define a root for articles /add. Actually, to be good, I should probably add a simple title to my link. So this view's done. We're showing the user the data we have currently. We're letting them view any record they want, and we're giving them the ability to add a new one. So just a static link here. That's okay, we get 404. We haven't handled that root. So we're going to need to handle this one. We're going to need to handle that root as well. Right now, the only article root we're handling is the root. inside of articles. Alex?
Go to your article.js.
Sure.
Because,
You want to see the model?
well, yeah, I don't know if it's not, I guess so, because we Marco, I guess, get the same error. I was talking about if you don't name it the same thing, but if you said if you don't, like the articles.length, if you don't name that the same as, because you have the mongoose in there, but I don't have those, so that's probably why. I don't know.
So what are you missing from here?
No, if you go back to index.ejs,
Yep.
yeah, and use line number 9,
Yep.
I get an error on that line because it says articles doesn't exist. Yeah.
Okay. So articles doesn't exist.
It's in our articles.js. I'm pretty sure it's never entering.
So the problem may be that this isn't working. Your find isn't working.
Yeah,
Correct.
I guess so, yeah.
That is something. Yeah.
So is there something, are you missing something in your model that would perhaps be causing your query not to run?
Did you change anything in that today?
No, I have not made any
This is
change.
your code,
Yeah.
so-
This is the file from last week.
Yeah, that's the, I grabbed the file from GitHub.
Okay. And did you include at the top of your controller both Mongoose
No, I did not do that.
and you need to reference the model? So you need lines 5 and 8. Otherwise, your controller doesn't know what an article is, right? You've got to tell it the definition of article is found here in the model.
So it doesn't inherit from app.js.
It does not.
I have that, I just don't have the mongoose one.
Yeah, you need both.
Yeah. So
Does it matter which order you come in?
I don't think so. So we're going to need to build 2 more views. We're going to need to build an add view that has a form. Well, that one's simple. We don't even really need to use any node code. We can just use HTML and build a simple form. If we think about the form, if we look at our model for a minute, right, our schema's got 4 columns. Our collection has 4 columns. It's got an ID column, which we can ignore because that's auto-generated. How many fields do we need on our articles/add page? Why do we only need 2 when we've got 3 fields defined in the schema? Michael? Yeah, date will default to now, so we don't have to give the user. As soon as we save it, it'll generate, we're setting a default, the database will generate that. So all we need is a form. What's the form going to look like? So what will we see? What are we going to have to put on there?
2 inputs, one for title and one for content.
Yeah, and what kind of inputs should we have? What are those going to look like?
Text box for title, text area.
You got it. A text box for title and a text area for content, and we'll want a submit button down at the bottom. That's it. So we said our link is going to go to articles/add. So the next thing we need to do in our views is go to article, our article subfolder. Let's add a new file, and I'll call it add.ejs. I don't need to call it article add because it's going inside of the article subfolder. I'll add it to Git, and I just get a blank slate. We can just knock this one off quickly. It's a few lines of HTML. We'll build a form. So the first thing we'll do is include our header. We can end with our body and HTML tags down at the bottom. And we'll just put on a main section and build a simple form. No logic on here at all. So I'll add a main section with a heading Now we could try to do add and edit in the same view. To keep it clean, I'm actually going to create two separate views just so the root handling is a little bit cleaner. We'll need a form. We're going to have to set method equals post. You guys haven't done this for a while. When we did this in PHP, we always also added an action attribute. We would post to a different page. With Node, we really don't need to do this. We'll let this page post to itself. We'll save the new article, and then we'll immediately redirect the user back to our index view. So if I leave the action out, it'll just post to itself, which is fine. I'll create a field set. I may need a Bootstrap class on here. We'll see what it does. For now, I'll just leave it with the default. And I'll create a label for title. I'll make it 2 columns wide. Remember we said the Bootstrap grid system is 12 columns. So I'll size my labels so that they're the same width. Everything will align. And I'll create an input box, give it a name of title, and we'll add the required attribute to it. I'll create a second field set with a text area for content. Now, there are some EJS shortcuts. If you want to look at those, you can. So there are certain tags in EJS that will generate this HTML. Really doesn't matter whether you use the raw HTML or use the EJS shortcuts. Up to you. No, we don't need a type on the input. Why not? We could. We don't have to supply a type attribute here. Yeah, because the default is text. If you leave that attribute out. So if it's a single line text box, I omit it because I'm just adding HTML overhead to the page. I never define attributes that I don't need. So I'll add a second field set with a second label. I'll give it the same class. And I'll create a text area with a name of content. Always a good idea to name your controls to match the columns in the database. Just keeps it simple. I'll set it up as required. And then I'll want a submit button. So I'm going to offset it by 2 columns so it appears in the middle. It'll be aligned nicely with the left side of my 2 text boxes by using that offset 2, because my labels take up the first 2 columns. So rather than having my button on the left aligned with my labels, I want my my button aligned with the left edge of my text boxes. And I'll give it btn primary, just use a Bootstrap class. Actually, maybe I'll use something else. I'll use the green one. btn success, which will make my buttons green. So there's our form. All strictly HTML and applying a bit of Bootstrap formatting. No server-side code. So now what we need to do is we need a root handler to process it. So when the user clicks our add a new article link, we know to load this view. Right? We've built the view, but if I go ahead and click that link, I'm still going to get a 404. Our application doesn't know that article/add should load this page. We're going to have to manually add that piece. So if I go back and click on add, our view doesn't automatically load. It's not that smart. We need to tell it what page is supposed to load when the user goes to that URL. Any questions about the form? I'm assuming this should be old hat for you guys. I know you haven't built forms for a while, but there's nothing new here. So where do we go to set up the root handling so Node knows what to do when the request comes into articles/add? Ed?
Index, but yeah.
It's not in index. Nope. Yeah, we'll go in to articles.js. This handles all of the requests inside of articles. So we've got a get handler at the root. What type of handler do we need to show our add form? So it's going to be when there's a get request at articles/add. This is the URL we need to handle. Why are we using get?
I'm wondering though, isn't the root already set to /articles like by default?
Yes, sorry. Thank you. We're already inside of articles. You're right. That should just be /add. Thank you. If we wrote this handler in index.js, then we would need /articles. We're already inside of articles because our app.js says whenever we get requests at /articles, use the articles controller. Thank you. Good catch. So now we need our callback with our request, response, and next. So this handles requests at /articles. This handles requests at /articles/add. So what do we want to do when the user goes to localhost /articles/add? Yeah. So. Cool. So show inside of views, inside of the article subfolder, show the view called add. We need to pass one value to that view. What value needs to get passed? We've got to pass the title because the header is looking for a variable called title. We have to define it. So I'll create a title variable. So this should now load our form and pass in the title. So if I go back and refresh, I've got the 404 message up, I think. Okay, it did load it, but it says there's a problem with my path. Anybody see what the problem is? Why am I getting the error? Why didn't it load? What did I screw up? Yeah, I put in my path as partials dot. It's got to be partials slash. So if I go back to my view right here, my editor's actually telling me, had I bothered to read the message, my path's unresolved. It should be partials, oops, slash, save my change. There we go. So now we get, I'll add a little spacing to this. So now we get a blank form using that offset class is what pushes my button over here so it's aligned. What will happen if I submit this? Okay, well first my HTML5 validation runs. So what's going to happen if I submit this now?
Well, nothing because you don't have a built-in.
So what am I going to see? You're right. Well, it's not quite nothing. What's the error going to be?
No, post. Fine. Post handler.
You're close. The error we're going to get is 404. Why am I going to get 404?
Because you don't have anything to render on post.
Right. We've handled a GET request at this URL, but this is going to run the same URL, but the request type is no longer going to be GET, it's going to be POST. Well, our articles.js, our root is now set up. It knows what to do with a GET request, but we haven't told it what to do with a POST request at this URL. Okay? 404. So we know what to do when we have a GET request at this URL. So now we need a second handler for when there's a POST request done at that same URL. Going to do one other thing. Just going to add a couple classes here for formatting. In my field set tags, I'll set this up as form-group, which should space the field sets out a bit. Another built-in class to Bootstrap. Just gives me a little bit of breathing room there. I just added class form group to my two field set tags. That'll add a bit of padding to them so that they're not stacked right up against each other.
Sorry, just a quick question. I'm kind of still on articles.js.
Okay.
What do you do with mongoose? You create the variable and you call it. Is there another line that you do with mongoose?
Nope, you just need to reference it and then reference your model.
I have to do what's going on.
I will have a look when I have a chance. Okay. So what's the next thing we're going to need to do? We can now load the form, but it's, you know, the sound of one hand clapping here. We're turning a crank that's not connected to anything on the other end. So what's the next thing we need to do? Yeah, we need to handle the router post so we don't get the 404. So we'll go back to articles. So now we want to process the submission of a new article. So in this time, instead of get, we want to run a post command. What happens when there's a form post? And again, our URL is /add. So the same URL on line 41 and line 34. Right? We've got two different ways that page can be processed. Is it loading for the first time? Well, if so, show the form. If it's been submitted to the server, well, we need to process the data the user gave us. So again, we'll put in our callback parameters of request, response, and next. Now in our index view, we used Mongoose. We didn't have to write any query. We just called article.find, and that performed our query for us. We look at Mongoose for a minute. And look at mongoose.js. If we take a quick look at the docs, it may show us CRUD somewhere in here. This probably isn't the right link. So there's, oh heck, I'll just write the code. So what we want to do in here is use our article model. It's a type Mongoose schema, and it should have a built-in create method. So we're going to call create. And what we need to do is we need to define the values we want to pass into that create. We said we only need to pass two of the values, right? The object ID is auto-generated, the date is defaulted. So we want to set the title. So how do we get the title from our form? one of these three parameters contains the form data. Which one do you think it is? Request, response, or next? Yeah, so in request, in here we want to use the request.body, and then we can reference the object that we called name. So this would be the PHP equivalent of $_post title. This syntax is better. It makes more sense, really. It's easier to read. And then we want to set the content to request.body.content. Notice these appear in purple. If I don't name that, so it understands that where that's coming from, it looks at our view and it doesn't know what that is. So we're going to call create, and then the most efficient way, we're actually going to chain two methods together. We're going to call this function, and then we can immediately do something after it. So rather than terminating this with a semicolon, when this command runs, this does our save. Well, wow, that's easy, right? No insert command. We don't have to set up typed parameters and pass in values. We can just do this all in 3 lines of code. So after we're done creating, maybe I'll put a comment up here. So try to save and redirect to index if successful. So now we'll pass in do our callback. And then I'll need to close my article create here. And now we'll need to evaluate our save. So if we got an error, we'll log it. And we'll send that error in the response to the browser. Now the nice thing, when we call article.create, we do get the article back. So let's say we want to read the ID number that got generated. We now have the ID number. So let's say we're ordering something online. We're building an order page. As we call create, not only will that save the new order, but Mongoose will then automatically populate this object with the order ID. So let's say we want to display a confirmation to the user and show them their order ID, or we want to send an email and include that unique value, we can do that. We don't need to do that if we don't get an error. We can we could do one of two things really. We could either call res.render and load the articles view here and pass in the title, or we could just redirect, which then runs a get request at /articles, take them back to the main page. So I think we'll do that instead, which is simple. Response.redirect. Same command we'll use when you do ASP.NET. Better than PHP's wonky header location command. So where do we want to redirect to? We'll just redirect to /articles, which is our root. This this closing bracket's in the wrong place. This round bracket here before the comma, oops, that has to stay open. So this whole article.create is here. Run create on Mongoose, then evaluate the result and do something. Either show an error or redirect the user.
So with res.redirect, is it also, do we need /articles or just / because we're in articles.js?
No.
So it's taken from the root?
It's from the, yes, start at the root and go back, which then runs this GET request. So basically this function, when it's done, if it's successful, this will call this, which should load our index view. So we can chain these methods together. It's fairly efficient. We don't have to. It's pretty common practice. So I will try and add a new article, see what happens. So I'm going to put in a title and content. And here's our article. So it is really fast, right? MongoDB, our schema generates today's date as the default. And if I click on it, it's generated a new ID. So we're getting there. We can view data, we can add. As you can imagine, doing the edit won't be all that different from doing the add. So what we want to do is fix this. So rather than 404, we can handle this root. We can give the user the article in a form. They can make changes and save those changes. So again, we'll need both a get and a post handler here for editing. And we'll need to build a similar form. The only difference is that form's going to have to show the values. When the user clicks on a link, we don't show them a blank article. We want to show them the full article. We only need to make one more view. Then we'll do delete. Delete, we don't even need a view. We can just run the function and redirect the user back. We don't even need to make an EJS file for that part. So we only need one more view. With 3 views, we can do all of CRUD. We'll just build index, add, and edit. Any questions before we move on to do an edit?
For some reason, I'm not able to read CRUD.
You get an error?
It's just hanging.
Do you have the slash in your path?
Yes.
Okay. Check your database to see if the data is inserted.
Yeah, I've actually created a few articles.
Okay, so the record's there. Okay. Go ahead and make my edit EJS. This is the last EJS file we need. I'll make a new file, call it edit. Whoops. So I'm going to grab everything out of my article. I'll just dump it in edit and I'll change the title. Everything else can stay the same. We still want all of this. So now what we want, when the user clicks on an article title, we want to load this view. So in here, we've now got 3 root handlers: a get at the root, a get at /add, a post handler at /add. What type of handler do we need now to show the edit view? We want to run a get or a post to display the form. Yeah, so when the user clicks on a title, so here's the URL, /. Now if we want to indicate, remember that value is going to be dynamic. So the way we indicate, we tell the server that's a parameter is with a colon, and we'll define our parameter as ID. So this will be articles slash and some variable, basically. And again, we'll use our callback parameters, request, response, and next. So this kind of definition should start to look familiar. This is the 4th time we've done it. And we're going to need 2 more in this handler in order to complete our application. And I know you guys did it when you were doing your portfolio, right? You wrote all the root handlers for the different pages.
So you got rid of add and you made it ID instead?
Yes, that's right. So on our previous one, we were handling the URL slash articles slash add. Now we want to handle the URL articles slash and an ID parameter. So we know we're going to need a res.render to display articles slash edit. We'll pass in a title. So if we run it like this, our page should load. We won't get a 404, but our form's going to be blank because we haven't done any work to populate that form yet. So we're going to need to run a query here to grab the ID and run a find by ID command. And then we're going to need to populate the individual values in our form. Put the title in the title box, put the content in the content text area. We'll do that in a minute. Let's make sure our root handler loads and that our EJS view shows up. So now if I click on any article, we get our edit view. It's just not showing the data yet. But at least it's loading the right page and our view looks okay. So what we want to do is use our model in Mongoose. Rather than calling a general find to get all the documents, we just want the one document based on the request parameter called ID. We'll look that up, we'll get one article, and we'll pass that article back to our view. And then we can put the individual values wherever they go on our form. So what I'll do here is create an ID variable. I don't need to do this step, it's just a little cleaner. So the way we get this value, again, is using request, but instead of the body, with our form we use request.body. In this case we use request.params. So this value matches whatever signature we've given the parameter here. So that will pull the ID value out of the URL, store it in a variable. Now we can use that variable and send it to Mongoose so we know which document we want. So now we'll use Mongoose and our model to find the right article. So instead of calling find, I'm going to call find by ID. So now we'll pass in our ID value as the first parameter, and then we'll pass in a callback as the second. That will either give us an error back, or it will give us an object of type article that contains one and only one article. So we're going to run that find command, and we're actually going to move this inside of an else condition. We need to evaluate what did we get back from our callback? Did we get an error or did we get one article returned? So if we have an error, we'll do what we've been doing. We'll log it. And we'll send it to the browser. If we didn't get an error object back, we've got an article object back. So in this case, I'm going to move this inside of the else. If we didn't get an error back, that means now we have an article back from our query. We want to show the view. We need to do one more thing. We need to add one more line of code inside of our else condition. What else do we need to do here? Everything that's here is right, but we want to add something to it. Sorry?
Res.end.
We don't need it. The res.render basically will do it. The code will work if I do this. What's going to happen if I refresh my browser right now? What do you expect to see in the browser? Give you a hint. It won't crash.
Nothing.
We won't get nothing.
Missing a variable, so an error about missing something.
Oh, it removes the ID value.
No. So it's loading fine. It's doing right now. It's working exactly as I've coded it. What's the problem?
Hasn't done anything with that article yet.
Yeah, we've queried the article. We're storing the result in this object, but our view doesn't know what that article object is yet, right? This has to get sent to the view so we can put the title and content into our form. So how would I do it? What line am I going to have to add on to?
After the title, article details.
Yep.
So articles.
Well, whatever. In this case, I'm going to call it article because it's singular. So now I'm going to pass the object we got from our find by ID. We need to send that record to the user interface so we can show the values. Right? Without this, we can't populate our view. And the whole point of this page is to show the user the data we already have.
Is it being sent as JSON?
Yes, this is a this is a JSON object.
But the article, like the article parameter that we're putting in, article is article like.
It's of the schema, it's of this class. But it is in JSON format. So we won't see any difference when I refresh. So now we're passing the object. We just have to do one more thing. My form's still blank. Why is the form still blank?
Never display that content.
Yeah, so we're going to have to go to our edit view and we're going to have to inject those two column values from our article. So in my text box, this is similar to how we would do it in PHP. Right? We're going to need to set the value and output article.title in here. And in my text area, the text area doesn't have a value property. Just in between the opening and closing tags, we need to output article.content. Now our form should be complete. So whatever I name the variable here, I've got to use the same name when I'm referencing that object in my view, right? It's being passed. So it's got to have the same name. So now I can click any article.
Go back to your function.
So now we've got 4 root handlers in our controller. The get at index, the get at add, the post at add, and the get at /ID. What will happen if I go back to my browser and click my lovely green submit button? 404. Why will I get 404? Right, there's no post handler yet in the root. What the heck am I supposed to do? You haven't told me what to do when there's a post request running at this URL. So we handled the GET request. We now need to handle the post request too. Any questions about the view? All I added here was this content on line 9 and this content on line 13. Other than that, it's identical, and I changed the heading. That's it. So we just need to do two more things. We need a post handler, and then we want to add a delete button on here beside the submit button. And then we'll run another handler if the user tries to delete an article. We'll need to do that too. So here's our get method. So what I want you to do underneath this is now set up a post handler at that same URL. So we'll need router.post with a /:ID. So if the user makes a post, they submit the edit form, we need to save their changes. And again, we'll want to redirect the user back, just like we do after the add function runs. So we'll get rid of those lines, just to clean it up. So now we want to process the edit form submission. So here's our 5th root handler. So there's a few different ways we can kind of do this. We've used the create method in Mongoose. We've used the find method. We've used find by ID. Mongoose has an update method. So we can basically create a new article object, fill the values from our request. We'll need to fill the ID value from our request parameter, and we'll fill the title and content from the request body, just like we did with create, and then we'll call update, take the user back to the index view. Yes, single quotes, thank you. That's a string. We need single quotes around it. Good catch, Alex. So first I'll set up a variable for ID again. We'll get it the same way, request.params.id. So I'm going to create an article. So I'm going to instantiate a new object of type article, right? Using our model so we know what an article looks like. And we'll populate the title and content the same way we did above. So the title comes from our request.body title. So again, this is all JSON. We've just got another object in JSON format of type article. So based on the class that we defined in our schema. So now we'll use Mongoose to do the update. So we'll call article.update. The first parameter it wants to know is what's the ID. So we'll pass in our ID variable. We'll also pass in the article object we just created as the second parameter. And then our third parameter is our callback function. So when we run this, here's the ID we want, here's the primary key of the record we want to identify. Here's the object that contains the new data, and trap for an error. Notice we don't have to do the column mapping. Mongoose is smart enough to know if our object has a column called title and a column called content, it maps them based on those column names. Right? We've all done it when we write the SQL queries that the column name and the value we give it just aren't right, or we put things in the wrong place. Mongoose takes that guesswork away from us. So now we just evaluate the result. If we got an error, log it, send it back to the browser. If we didn't get an error, actually it should be slash, I think is what we did here. From the root, we'll go to articles. So grab the ID from the URL, create a new article object, and parse the two input fields. Pass all three of those, well, basically two objects, our ID and our article object, to Mongoose. Let Mongoose run the update, and then determine what happened. When we do our delete function, it's going to look really similar, as you can imagine, except we don't need to set this part up. All we need is the ID, and we can do a delete. Well, let's see if we did it right. So I'll change the title here. Oh, whoops. Okay. Notice what it says. It tried to change my ID column. So I missed one small step. What I should also do here is I need to include my ID. Otherwise, it tries to change the ID. So I want to define this ID as part of my article we're changing. Otherwise, Mongoose tries to assign a new one. So I missed this on line 85. So it's underscore ID is the name of the database column, and we're populating it with our ID variable that comes out of our URL. By passing it the ID, it will try and run an update on the existing ID. It won't try to change that value. If I resend, now my update runs. I can continually make changes. One of the other nice things, again, we're not using an SQL command, so special characters, I put in something like a single quote that would break a traditional SQL string. Mongoose handles that no problem, because it's not using an SQL string to do it. So we do need to specify the ID value, the primary key value of the record in our object. We're almost there.
Following along. Still hoping to see the page eventually.
So you need to do one more thing. You need to add a delete button. We'll add it beside the submit button on our edit.ejs. This won't be a submit button because we don't want it to post the form, so I'll put in a button, type equals button. I'll give it the same class of actually, I think if I give it btn danger, the delete button will be red. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it a link. I'm also going to want, so I want to link to articles/delete/parameter. And I also am going to want a JavaScript confirmation. So if the user clicks it, they don't automatically get delete. They get prompted first. So if I just save this and make sure it shows up first of all. That's good. Clicking it right now does nothing, which is okay. So I'm going to wrap this inside of an anchor tag. So this is going to go to articles/delete. How can we append the article ID onto the end of that link? Well, we'll try that. We'll see what happens. Put in title equals delete. So I'll just wrap the button inside of, whoops, anchor tags. So that isn't going to quite work. We're on the right track. What will we need to do? Why does it render that as a literal? Yeah, it's a server-side value. So what we're going to need instead of the :ID, we're going to need server-side tags. And we're going to need the article._ID. That's the value that we want. So when we do the find by ID, not only will it populate the title and content, it also populates all the columns automatically. So this is the URL we want to be running, and we'll need the root handler for. The last thing we want to do is add a little JavaScript here. So on the click event, we'll want to return a confirmation message. We did this in PHP with the exact same JavaScript. So I'll add in that code you see wrapping the second part of line 16. So now clicking the link, rather than firing it right away, it should give the user a little JavaScript pop-up with an OK and cancel button. They click cancel, the link is disabled, so it doesn't fire. They click OK, our URL should load. Just try it out. Whoops, I probably want a question mark here. If I cancel it, nothing happens. If I click OK, the link then proceeds. So I just put in a question mark. So our view is done. So we've really written a very lightweight app. If you think how many total lines of HTML we had to write, what do we've got here? 27. If we look at our views, 23, so 50 lines there. Another 75, and where's my index.ejs? 50. So less than 100 lines of HTML to build a CRUD app. It's pretty good. So here was that again if you need to see it. So all we need to do, and we've got plenty of time to do it, we just need to write a get handler at articles/delete/:id. And we'll use Mongoose. We'll grab the ID, we'll pass that ID to Mongoose, and we'll call the remove function. Take the user back to the home page. So we'll open up articles.js. Last root handler. Run delete on the selected article. So we'll use get at /delete/:id, and yes, I forgot my single quotes again. So here's the URL we want to process now. So let's grab the ID parameter out of the URL. We'll use Mongoose and our model to call remove. What record are we removing? Well, the one with this ID value. We don't even need to get anything back from it, just an error. If we get an error, let's just do the same thing. Log it. Send it back. Otherwise, what should we do if our delete works? Yeah, let's just redirect. And we'll need a semicolon down here. So we don't even need a separate page for this. All we need is a link to call it and a root handler. Let's do the delete and get out of here. Try it out and we'll see if it works. You may want to add an article or two first so that you still have some data to work with if we're going to try deleting one. So if I say yes, it's gone. So I had a duplicate number 2. I also have a duplicate number 1, our first article. Now I'm down to 4. So really most of the work is really in doing your controllers. The model is simply just looks like your database collection. And the views, the HTML is really pretty light for building this. Most of the real work happens here. But even here, Mongoose is really doing most of the hard stuff. All of the places with PHP where we were likely to make mistakes, all of that code is handled by Mongoose. We really just need to be aware of the different methods Mongoose exposes. So in this case, we're going to use remove, update, find by ID, create, and find. That lets us build out a full CRUD app in about between the article, model, this whole thing is 200 lines of code to build a full CRUD app for articles. That's pretty good. You can see how you can build rapidly. Okay. I'm going to stop the video for today.